The wind screamed like a living thing that night, clawing at the sides of the dugout shelter until it seemed the whole mountain might rise up and blow apart. Snow and grit lashed the small window, rattling the shutters, and Malachi Ridge could feel it in his bones, how the storm pressed down like a punishment. He threw another log onto the fire, the flame leaping up wild and orange in the stone hearth. Ash, his mare, nickered low from the lean-to beside the dugout, and he paused to listen. Her sound wasn't restless, just waiting, like him. Then it came again. A voice thin as smoke carried on the wind. "Please, somebody." Malachi froze. The fire crackled behind him. He turned his head toward the door, heart thudding in his chest. He waited, not breathing, eyes fixed on the seam where the heavy door met the frame. The wind moaned. The voice didn't return. He told himself it was the wind playing tricks. Wind could sound like anything when it screamed through rocks and trees and dead limbs. He turned back toward the hearth, picked up the poker. "Please don't hurt me. I can't walk." He dropped the poker. The words came clearer that time, unmistakably a child's voice, and not imagined. Not unless madness had finally caught him after all these years. Malachi's jaw set. He grabbed his coat from the hook near the door, strapped on his gun belt without thought. The Colt sat heavy at his hip. He hadn't fired it in 7 years, but he cleaned it every week just in case the world came knocking again. He stepped outside into a slap of freezing wind. Snow didn't fall so much as rip sideways through the canyon, stinging his face and cutting visibility down to a few yards. He pulled his bandana up over his nose, narrowed his eyes, and turned toward the sound. The voice had come from the North Ridge, the open, flat land. The worst place to be in a storm like this. He moved fast each step, a battle through wind and snowdrift. The land was stripped of color, just ghost-white snow-slate sky and the red smear of blood that lived in memory. His boots sank deep, the cold biting straight through the deerskin. The wind howled so loud, he had to press his hand to his hat to keep it from tearing away. And then he saw her. A small shape huddled against a dead sagebrush half buried in wind-packed snow. A child unmoving. For one terrifying breath, he thought she was already gone. He dropped to his knees beside her. She was maybe 8, maybe younger, bone-thin, under a ragged dress that had once been blue. One leg was twisted at a brutal angle, and her lips were blue. Her cheeks were cracked and bloodless. Her hair was matted with snow and dirt. Her hands were bare. He touched her shoulder gently. She flinched so violently, she cried out a raw, broken sound that didn't belong in a child's mouth. "Easy," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes opened, wide, terrified amber honey in the moonlight. They looked at him like he was the devil come to finish her off. "Don't hurt me," she whispered, breath frosting between her lips. "Please." "I won't." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifting her carefully. She whimpered when her broken leg shifted, but didn't scream. She clung to his shirt like it was the last thread tying her to the living. "I got you," he murmured. She didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back as she sagged against him, too cold to stay awake. The walk back was a crawl through hell. The wind doubled ice slicing at his skin. Snow filled his eyes and mouth. His arms burned from the weight of her, but he never stopped moving. Inside the dugout was warm and flickering with firelight. He kicked the door shut and knelt by the hearth, laying her down on the wool blanket. Steam rose from her soaked clothes. He moved fast, pulled the kettle onto the heat, grabbed the extra blankets from the cot, stripped the wet rags from her body, careful not to touch skin more than he had to. Her leg was bad, swollen. The bone was bent at the shin like a snapped twig. She needed more than he had, antibiotic surgery maybe, but there was no doctor for miles. Just him and what he could remember from setting fractures on the trail. She stirred. "Where's Mama?" The words were breathless, brittle. "I don't know," he said gently. "You got a name, Luma," she whispered. "Luma Whitebird. That's a strong name." Her face twisted. "Mama said, 'Men out here, they hurt girls.'" Malachi sat back. The fire popped between them. "Not this one," he said. She stared at him with eyes too old for her face. "You gonna take me back to him?" she asked suddenly. "Who the man she gave me to?" Malachi's hands curled into fists on his knees. "No," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." She seemed to believe him, just barely. He cleaned her wounds, biting his lip as she whimpered and cried through every touch. When he finally wrapped her leg, she was pale and sweating, but still awake. "Where's your mama now?" he asked. "She said she'd come back." Luma blinked hard, but she didn't. "Who left you out there, Wade Thorne?" The name landed heavy in Malachi's gut. He hadn't heard it in a long time, but he remembered. Sheriff of Sierra Roja. Owned the town, the courts, the people. Rumor said he owned worse. "What's he to you? He owns Mama now." Malachi stared at the fire. His fingers touched the butt of his Colt. Old memories stirred. "Old debts, mister." Her voice was paper thin. "You gonna make him go away?" He looked down at her, so small in his coat, her eyes still wide even through the pain. "Yes," he said. She sighed. Her body relaxed against the blankets. Outside, the wind shifted. Malachi stood and crossed to the door. He unlatched it slowly, peering into the storm. There, just beyond the oak stump prints. Fresh, booted, not his. They didn't come from the north. They came from the east, then circled around the dugout and vanished. His hand went to his gun. They knew she was here, and they were coming back. The girl didn't speak at first. She just stared at the fire like it had whispered something to her. A slow wind moaned through the timbers of the cabin, drawing shadows across the floor like reaching fingers. The girl lay on Caleb's old cot, swaddled in two patched blankets, her legs still stiff with cold. Her face, too thin for a child, reflected the glow of the flames, and her hands twitched now and again like she was bracing for a strike that never came. Caleb moved quietly, placing another log on the fire. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. The mountains taught him silence had its own kind of strength. If something needed to be said, it would come on its own, like the thawing of spring after a hard winter. For now, he offered warmth. A bowl of stew waited beside the fire, and his old hound Josie had curled up near the girl's feet without being told. Still, his mind wasn't quiet. The bruises on her arms, the way her eyes darted at every noise, and those words she'd cried into the snow, "Please don't hurt me, I can't walk." Caleb had seen harm before. Back when he rode under the name Colt McGraw, he'd met the worst kinds of men. But there was a different kind of violence in the way this girl had been broken. Not just fists or cold. A betrayal that hollowed something out of her. He finally sat down on the floor across from her. She hadn't touched the stew. "You got a name?" he asked, voice low and worn. The girl's eyes flicked up. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Caleb waited. "Ruthie," she whispered. "Ruthie Rainwater." Caleb nodded once. "That yours or someone else's?" "My mama's," she said. "Rainwater's our family name. She told me never to forget it, even when she left me." There it was, the sharp, ragged edge beneath the silence. Her mother had left her. In the snow. On purpose. Caleb leaned back against the stone hearth. He didn't flinch. Why'd she do that? Ruthie's lip trembled. Her hands clenched around the wool blanket. He said I was no use anymore, that I'd slow them down. "Mama," She didn't want to, I think. But she did it anyway. Who's he? Her voice dropped into something colder than the wind outside. Mr. Hatch. Caleb went still. He stared into the firejaw set. Boone Hatch Ruthie nodded slowly. Where'd they go, I don't know. They were headed west, I think. Said something about Colorado Springs. Said if I couldn't walk, I couldn't come. So they left me by the river near the old cattle trail. Caleb closed his eyes for a breath, steadying the storm inside him. Boone Hatch was trouble wrapped in fine boots and silver rings. He'd slithered up from Amarillo a few years back, throwing money into dying towns and buying silence with whiskey and fear. No law stuck to him. No sheriff dared. And now he was leaving children in the snow. He looked back at Ruthie. Her eyes were clear but tired. She'd told the truth, or at least as much of it as her little heart could carry. You said you can't walk, he murmured. What happened? Ruthie hesitated. Then slowly she pulled back the blanket and pointed to her right leg. It was twisted, the knee slightly out of line. Caleb leaned in closer, gently resting a weathered hand near her ankle without touching. Old break, he asked. She nodded. Fell from a wagon last winter. We didn't go to no doctor. Mr. Hatch said it'd heal on its own. It didn't. Caleb exhaled through his nose, slow and tight. Josie whined from her spot on the floor, sensing the tension. You got pain, not always. Just when it gets cold, or when I try to stand. I'll see what I can do, Caleb said softly. You stay put. You're safe here. Something flickered in her eyes. Disbelief. Then something else like a candle lit for the first time in a long while. You won't leave me, she asked. No, ma'am, Caleb said, voice like a vow. Not ever. Not even if the devil himself rides through that door. Ruthie swallowed, and for the first time her hands unclenched from the blanket. Caleb stood and moved to the cabinet where he kept the old whiskey and herbs. He poured a touch into a chipped tin cup, diluted it with hot water, and crushed a few willow bark leaves from a jar. This'll take the edge off, he said. Tastes bitter, though. She took it without complaint, drank it like she was used to worse. When she drifted into sleep, Caleb sat back down by the fire elbow on his knee jaw, locked in thought. Outside, the wind beat against the cabin like it was looking for a way in. Boone Hatch was moving west, probably looking to trade something or someone. Caleb had left that world behind. Blood Bullet's betrayal. He'd buried it with his old name. Colt McGraw was supposed to stay dead. But now he had a girl with a twisted leg sleeping under his roof, whispering a name that shouldn't be whispered anymore, and a mother who had left her child in the snow to keep up with the devil. He looked down at Ruthie's small form wrapped tight against the chill. A man can hide for only so long. Eventually, something finds him. A name, a child, a reckoning. Caleb's hands tightened around the mug. The fire crackled like it knew what he was thinking. If Boone Hatch was headed west, Caleb would need help. And there was only one man he trusted from that old life. A tracker. Half Comanche, half myth, and the only one alive who could follow Boone's trail across that stretch of country without being seen. His name was Amos Redmoon, and if he still breathed, he'd be somewhere near the Ghost Rock Ridge. Caleb rose, pulled his coat from the hook, and stepped onto the porch. Snow drifted off the roof like a sigh. The moon hung low and wide, pale as bone. Behind him, the girl stirred, but did not wake. He stared at the darkness beyond the pines. Reckon it's time, he muttered to the wind. If I ride fast, I can reach him by dusk tomorrow. Then he turned, shut the door softly, and began to pack. The snow turned to mud near Ghost Rock Ridge where the pines grew thick and the wind sounded like voices in prayer. Caleb guided his horse up the narrow trail, boots damp, coat heavy with sleet. He hadn't spoken in hours. His thoughts stayed knotted around one thing: Amos Redmoon. They hadn't seen each other in 5 years. Not since the firefight outside Big Creek, where Caleb had taken a bullet in the ribs and Amos had vanished into the trees, wounded but breathing. They'd both agreed never to meet again. Men like them with ghosts riding behind their saddles didn't get second chances. But Ruthie had changed that. Caleb dismounted near a crooked post where someone had hung a rusted horseshoe and a twist of braided sweetgrass. It was a signal, a wordless kind of welcome, or warning, depending on who you were. He led his horse down a trail carved between 2 boulders. The forest deepened. The air thickened. Caleb could feel eyes on him, quiet and sharp. Then a voice rose from the shadows. "You're 2 days late, McGraw." Caleb smiled, though his hand twitched near his sidearm. "You're getting soft, Amos. I used to be able to sneak up on you." "You didn't," Amos replied, stepping out from behind a tree. He looked the same, tall and lean, with a long braid streaked in silver and a face carved from stone. A rifle rested in his hands, like it belonged there, like it always had. Caleb held up both palms. "Ain't here for trouble." Amos stared at him a beat longer, then lowered the gun. "You are trouble." "Maybe. But this time I got a reason." Amos's dark eyes narrowed. Girl Caleb blinked. "You knew I saw her trail. Bare feet, dragged leg, blood in the snow. Followed it till I saw your prints beside hers. Figured you'd scoop her up. Didn't think you'd come riding for me." Caleb nodded once. "She's hurt bad. Old break. Cold near took her. She talk, she did." "Boone Hatch." Amos didn't move, but something shifted in the air between them. "That man still breathes?" Amos asked. "Apparently." Amos turned and walked toward his camp. Caleb followed. They sat beneath a lean-to made of hides and pine poles. A small fire cracked between them. Amos poured black coffee from a dented pot and handed over a tin cup. Caleb drank. It tasted like burnt bark and soot. It steadied him. "She said Hatch left her," Caleb said. "By the cattle trail near the river bend. Said her mama didn't fight him much." Amos didn't answer right away. He took a slow pull from his cup, then set it down. "I've tracked Boone Hatch," before he said finally. "Back when he ran guns through Black Elk territory. He's got a gift for slippin' loose just when you think you've got him." "Would you help me find him? You sure about that?" Amos asked, tilting his head. "You ain't that man no more. Ain't worn your old name in years." Caleb rubbed his jaw. "That girl was left like a dog in the snow, Amos, with a twisted leg and no hope. And she still whispered her mama's name like it was gospel. That kind of loyalty. Don't deserve that kind of ending." Amos poked the fire with a stick. Sparks drifted into the dark like fireflies. "She's got your heart now," he said. "Maybe. But she needs more than heart. She needs justice." Amos stood and walked to his gear. He grabbed his pack and a long-bladed knife, slipping it into a worn sheath on his hip. "I'll ride with you," he said, "but we do this my way." Caleb stood, always did. "Then we ride at first light." They didn't speak much after that. Caleb tied off his horse, then bedded down near the fire. Amos didn't sleep. He kept watch, his face turned toward the trees. At dawn, they moved like shadows through the woods. Amos led them west, down old hunting trails and across frozen streams. He stopped often, kneeling in the snow, fingers grazing the earth like he was reading a book only he could see. He had a wagon, Amos said after a mile. "Heavy. 2 mules. They're not far." Caleb nodded. "She said they talked about Colorado Springs. Then we'll cut through Wind Howl Pass. I know a shortcut. Won't be easy." I didn't expect it to be. They pressed on, the cold bit harder. Clouds rolled low over the mountains, heavy with snow. By noon, they came across a burned-out camp, old Cole's boot prints, a torn piece of cloth caught on a thorn bush. Amos crouched low, eyes sharp. 3 men, 1 woman, 2 mules. The girl's scent ends here. Caleb's fists clenched. You think they're trading her, selling her? Amos didn't answer. He stood slowly, face grim. Boone's traded worse. They continued west. The trail steepened. By dusk, they reached the rim of Windhowl Pass. Below them stretched the open land beyond the ridge, dotted with rock and bare trees. Amos stopped and pointed. There. See the smoke? Caleb narrowed his eyes. A thin column rose from a low valley, gray against the white of the snow. You think it's him? I know his fires. He burns sage with the pine, mask the smell of meat, confuse the dogs. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then we ride. Amos grabbed his arm. No, we wait till dark. Then we slip in close. Caleb pulled away but nodded. They crouched under a ledge, waiting for the last light to bleed from the sky. The cold settled in their bones like an old wound. Caleb stared down into the valley, fingers tight around the stock of his rifle. I should have killed him back in Amarillo, he muttered. Amos didn't look up. You were still trying to be good then. Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper full of steel. I'm not trying anymore. The wind howled through the pass. The fire down below flickered in the gathering dark, and the hunt began. Night blanketed Windhowl Pass with a kind of stillness that made the snow seem louder beneath their boots. Amos moved like smoke, silent and sure, his steps falling where the brush was softest. Caleb followed, crouched low, his breath a slow plume in the cold air. The fire in the valley below flickered behind a ring of rocks, guarded by 2 men leaning lazy against a wagon yoke. Beyond them, a large canvas tent sagged under the weight of snow, its flap lifted just enough to let light spill across the frost-bitten ground. They've got a third inside, Amos whispered, barely moving his lips. Boone, most likely. He never trusts camp to hired hands. Caleb studied the guards. One had a shotgun across his lap. The other picked at his teeth with a twig, a pistol holstered loose at his hip. Both looked bored, but Caleb had learned long ago bored men shoot quickest. How do you want to play this? He murmured. We split, Amos said. I'll circle north, draw the guards. You go straight for the tent. What if she's not in there? Then we improvise. Caleb swallowed hard and nodded. His fingers flexed once over the grip of his revolver. He hadn't fired it in months, not since that business near Rosita. But muscle memory came back quick when the stakes were high. Amos vanished into the dark. Caleb waited. Then a rock clattered down the ridge to the north. One of the guards straightened, craning his neck. What was that? Probably a goat or something. The other muttered, but he stood up anyway, glancing toward the trees. Then came the whistle, soft, low, and sharp. Both men turned toward it. Caleb moved. He was across the snow like a shadow boots, barely brushing the frozen dirt. He slipped behind the wagon, ducked low, and made for the tent flap. He could hear muffled voices from inside. 1 male, 1 female. He hesitated. The female voice rose slightly, not in fear, but in defiance. You'll never get $1 for me, Boone. Not a penny. Boone's voice came back low and oily. I don't need $1 sweet. I just need you quiet. Caleb didn't wait. He surged forward and threw the flap-wide revolver raised. Boone was on his feet in a flash, a knife in one hand, shock across his face. He wore a thick coat, fur-lined, and his long beard had turned half gray. But his eyes hadn't changed. They were still mean. Ruthie sat tied in a chair behind him, cheeks red from cold, but her chin was up. She didn't look afraid. Boone laughed. Well, I'll be. Caleb McGraw. You're done, Boone, Caleb said. That right. Boone raised the knife. You always were good at storming into rooms, not so good at thinking through how you'd get out. Drop it. Boone took a step closer. You think you'll shoot before I stick her? I know I will. Boone lunged. Caleb fired once. The bullet struck Boone in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He crashed into a table, knocked over a lantern, and went down hard. The flame licked across the tent wall like a hungry tongue. Caleb rushed to Ruthie, cutting the ropes with his blade. You all right I am now? She breathed. They turned to run, but Boone groaned from the ground, dragging himself toward the flap. A loud thud split the air, and Boone collapsed. Amos stepped in, rifle raised, face cold as the moon above. Told you he never watches the north side, he muttered. The fire grew fast. Amos grabbed Ruthie's arm and hauled her outside, Caleb behind them. The tent collapsed inward as flames leapt skyward. The guards had fled. Their horses were gone. Only the wagon and its supplies remained, along with the echo of gunfire and smoke curling into the trees. They didn't stop until they reached a ridge 2 miles east, where the stars shone through breaks in the clouds, and the silence returned like a blanket drawn over the land. They made camp near a frozen creek. Amos built a small fire, low and smokeless. Ruthie sat beside Caleb, wrapped in a blanket pulled from the wagon. She was quiet, her hands trembling from the cold, or maybe from something deeper. Caleb handed her a cup of hot broth. You held your ground in there. You were brave. She looked at him, eyes wet but fierce. I had to be. Mama always said, when men think you're weak, show 'em teeth. She'd be proud of you. She wouldn't have left me, Ruthie said softly, staring into the flames. She didn't know what he planned. I know she didn't. Caleb reached over, resting a hand on her shoulder. We'll find out the truth, I promise. Amos stirred the fire with a stick, his voice low. Boone said any names. Ruthie shook her head. Just threats. Said someone paid him to take me to Dry Hollow. Caleb frowned. That's 2 days south, near the border. They trade flesh down there, Amos said. Girls vanish. Men pretend they never saw 'em. I'm not letting her vanish, Caleb said, steel in his voice. Whoever paid Boone is going to answer for it. Amos met his eyes across the fire. Then we ride at dawn. Caleb nodded. Ruthie leaned her head against his arm. Above them, the stars blinked cold and clear, and the wind carried with it the scent of pine and smoke, and something older, something watching. The storm may pass, but a girl never forgets the ones who left her in it. And she hadn't forgotten. Not Boone. Not the men by the fire. And not whoever waited in Dry Hollow thinking she was just another name erased by the wind. Morning broke cold and flat like a blade laid over the land. The snow had crusted in the night, each step crunching beneath the horses' hooves as they rode down from the high ridge into the skeletal trees below. Caleb rode out front, jaw tight, his breath fogging in the air. Ruthie rode between him and Amos, her shoulders hunched beneath the wool blanket, but her eyes didn't wander. They stayed forward, fixed on the distance, like she was already staring down whoever waited in Dry Hollow. Don't look like much from the ridge, Amos said, nodding toward the faint trail winding toward the south. That's the trouble with most hellholes, Caleb muttered. They hide in plain sight. They rode without speaking for a while. The trees thinned to scrub. The mountains eased back into low hills, and the path grew muddy where the snow had melted. Hawks circled high overhead, too lazy to hunt, just watching. Ruthie shifted in her saddle. You think Boone was lying about someone paying him? No, Caleb said. Boone wasn't smart enough to make up something that specific. He was a runner. Always was. He just followed orders. Then who gave him Caleb didn't answer. He wasn't sure yet, but there was one thing he knew: whoever paid Boone didn't think Ruthie would live to speak. That meant they wouldn't stop now. He glanced back at her, the bruises still faint on her face, the fire in her eyes burning brighter than the day before. Amos slowed his horse and pointed toward a small settlement half a mile off the road. That's Whisper Crossing. Last stop before Dry Hollow. We ought to check if anyone's seen Boone come through. Caleb nodded. And get Ruthie off the road for a bit. No sense in letting every stranger get a look at her. The town was little more than a cluster of buildings around a sagging general store and a half-frozen water trough. A crooked sign read, Whisper Crossing Pop 32. Dogs barked from behind fences, and a handful of children chased one another with sticks near the blacksmith's shed. They tied up their horses outside the saloon, if it could be called that, and stepped inside. The room was dim and smelled of old tobacco and spilled rye. A man with a mop of gray hair and a limp leaned behind the bar, polishing a chipped glass. He squinted at them. Ain't used to seeing strangers round here, especially not before noon. Caleb stepped forward. Name's McGraw. We're looking for a man who came through recently. Long coat, gray beard, scar down his cheek. The bartender snorted. You just described half the men that drink here. He'd have had a girl with him, young, brown hair, likely bound or frightened. That made the man pause. He glanced at Ruthie, then back at Caleb. You the law? No, Caleb said plainly. I'm worse. The bartender hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, I seen him 2 nights ago. Didn't stay long. Just stocked up on jerky and a bottle of rot gut. He was nervous, kept looking over his shoulder, paid cash and left toward Dry Hollow. Did he talk to anyone? Amos asked. The bartender nodded. One man, Grady McKern, used to run freight down to the border, but now he's into other things. Has a way of sniffing out folk in need of losing someone. Where do we find Grady? The man rubbed the back of his neck. He's got a shack out past the old mill. But if you're smart, you won't go bothering him. Grady's the kind of man who remembers slights and keeps tally. We're not here to be remembered, Caleb said. We're here to finish something. Back on the trail, they headed for the mill, its roof sagging under the weight of years and wind. Smoke rose from behind a stand of trees near it, curling in steady ribbons. As they approached, Caleb held up a hand and dismounted. We go quiet. Ruthie, stay with the horses. No, she said. I'm not sitting this out. This ain't pride. It's safety. Let me do this clean. She hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. Amos and Caleb moved through the trees flanking the cabin. It was smaller than expected, with boards over the windows and a stovepipe jutting out the side. A shadow moved across the cracked glass. Caleb knocked once, sharp. Silence. Then the door creaked open. Grady stood in the doorway, his eyes the color of clay, his hands resting easy at his sides. He was younger than Caleb expected, maybe 40, clean-shaven, with a long scar above one brow. You're late, Grady said flatly. Caleb blinked. Come again. Grady stepped back, letting the door swing wide. A man said someone'd be coming. Thought you'd be here yesterday. Amos stepped closer. Who told you that, Boone? Before he left. He said if he didn't show by sunup 2 days later, someone might come looking. Caleb narrowed his eyes. You were expecting us. Grady shrugged. Expecting trouble. Didn't know it'd wear your face. Why'd Boone come here to collect a name? Man who ordered the girl said she needed vanishing, and I make people vanish. For a fee, you give him that name. Grady paused, then nodded. Didn't know what she'd done to deserve it. Didn't ask. But I kept the ledger. He turned, picked up a small notebook off the table and tossed it to Caleb. Name's in there. Caleb flipped through the pages, his hands stilled on the name written in clean ink. Pastor Elijah Harlan, $200 down, $300 on delivery. Caleb's throat closed. Amos muttered, "That's the preacher from Dry Hollow, ain't it?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "One with the silver tongue and the cross bigger than his conscience." Ruthie appeared behind them, her voice a whisper. "He baptized me. He married my cousin. He told Mama she'd go to heaven if she stopped asking questions." Caleb looked at her. "You sure?" Her face was pale but steady. "I'd know his writing anywhere." "That's his name." Grady's voice was dry. "Man paid good money. That girl's worth something more than you know." "She's worth everything," Caleb said, slipping the notebook into his coat. "And he's going to learn what judgment feels like." "The righteous don't always win," Grady warned. "They don't have to," Caleb replied. "They just have to finish the fight." Ruthie turned toward the road, her face hardening as the wind kicked up dust around her boots. "A preacher paid to have me disappeared. I reckon he better start praying." "I can't trust easily," Lily whispered, her small voice trembling. "But I want to believe you won't leave like the others." The morning light came soft and cold, slipping through the cabin's frost-covered windows like a hesitant guest. Eli stood by the wood stove, stirring oats and watching the way the flames licked the bottom of the pot. His movements were quiet, deliberate. There was a peace in the ritual, one he hadn't known for years. Across the room, Lily was propped up with an extra pillow beneath her back, her hands curled around the patchwork quilt he'd brought in from the cedar chest. He glanced over. Her dark eyes followed him with a stillness he was coming to know, sharp, alert, always watching. "You slept," he said, voice low, as if not to disturb the silence that blanketed them. She nodded slightly. "I didn't dream about the cellar last night." That made something shift in his chest. He didn't press for details. He just handed her a tin cup of warm water and let the moment stretch. He'd spent most of the night thinking about the bruises he'd seen in the firelight the evening before. They ran across her shoulder like thumbprints. That kind of mark didn't just happen. Someone had held her there hard. Someone had meant harm. He didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, he stirred the oats again and ladled some into a bowl, setting it down beside her. "Too thick?" he asked. She shook her head and murmured a thank you, then spooned a bit slowly, carefully, like she was still learning how to eat at her own pace. "Your leg," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "Can I take a look now?" She hesitated. Her fingers tightened on the spoon. Then slowly she set it down and nodded. He pulled back the quilt and the fabric of her trousers, revealing the twisted angle of her ankle and the way the bruising had traveled like storm clouds. When he touched it, she winced, but didn't pull back. "It'll take time," he said, "but with rest it might heal better than they told you." Her mouth twisted. "They said I was born wrong, that my legs would always be wrong." Eli didn't answer right away. He wrapped the ankle gently, speaking with his hands. "People say a lot of things when they want to make themselves feel stronger. Doesn't mean they're right." She stared at the ceiling. "Mama left before I could walk. Daddy." He drank mostly. "Said I was a burden." The words hung there fragile and unfinished. Eli swallowed back the fire in his throat. "Is that why you were in that barn?" he asked quietly. Lily blinked her lashes, trembling. "They kept me there so no one would see. Said I was too broken to be part of the family. I wasn't allowed in town, just chores. And if I made noise..." Her voice faded. He'd heard enough. He rose, jaw tight, and returned to the stove. His hand clenched around the iron handle of the kettle. "They're not your family," he said finally. "Blood don't mean love." A long silence passed before she whispered, "Do you have any family?" He shook his head. "Lost them long time ago." She looked toward the window where the light pooled on the floorboards like liquid gold. "Then we're both a little lost, huh?" He allowed a small smile. "Maybe, but lost things can be found again." As the day warmed slightly, he lifted her into the handmade wheelchair he'd salvaged and repaired. Its wheels creaked, but it rolled smooth enough. He bundled her in a thick coat wool scarf and mittens, then rolled her to the porch where the sunlight touched the rails. She tilted her face toward it, breathing deep. "You ever been outside this long?" he asked. She shook her head, then added, "Not since I was real little. They said the cold would make my legs worse." "Cold strengthens bones," Eli muttered. They lied. She laughed small and sudden as if startled by her own joy. "I think you're right." He brought her warm cider, and the two sat in companionable silence, broken only by the distant sound of birds and the creek that ran behind the cabin. Eli noticed the way her eyes darted at every sound, still jumpy, still waiting for something bad to follow the good. He couldn't promise it wouldn't. But he could show her what it meant to be safe by never rushing, never raising his voice, never making a move she couldn't see coming. As the afternoon wore on, Sadie arrived on horseback, her cheeks flushed from the wind. "Well, I'll be," she said, stepping down and eyeing Lily warmly. "Is this the little lady Eli's been talking about?" Lily clutched the blanket higher around her chest. Eli crouched beside her. "Sadie's a friend. Helps folks in town, and sometimes stubborn mountain men, too." Sadie offered a gentle smile and a tin box. "I brought biscuits, and a little something for the girl if she don't mind." Inside was a rag doll with button eyes and blue yarn for hair. Lily reached for it slowly, reverently. Her fingers brushed the fabric as if it might disappear. "For me," she whispered. "Course," Sadie said. "Every girl ought to have one." Lily cradled it to her chest, like it was something sacred. Eli saw the wet shimmer in her eyes and looked away, swallowing hard. Sadie stepped aside with him. "What's the story, Eli?" He shook his head. "Don't know all of it yet, but I know she's not going back to whoever did this." Sadie nodded. "I figured. You need anything, just holler. I'll talk to Doc Pierce. See if he'll come by. She ain't ready for strangers. Then I'll talk to him about crutches." Quietly. As Sadie rode off, Eli turned back and found Lily asleep, the doll tucked under her chin. That night, after the fire was low and the wind curled against the logs of the cabin, Eli sat near her bed, mending a tear in her coat. His fingers worked slow, careful stitches into the worn fabric. He thought about how many winters she must have faced with thin clothes and no fire. He looked over at her and whispered, "You got a place here now, Lily, if you'll take it." She stirred but didn't wake. The doll slipped from her arms and hit the floor with a soft thud. Eli bent, picked it up, and placed it gently beside her. As he turned down the lamp, the mountain outside stood quiet under the moonlight snow, drifting down like falling prayers. Inside, something had shifted, something small and sacred. He didn't know what lay ahead, but she was no longer a shadow in someone else's barn. She was here, and he'd make sure she stayed. "I won't let her grow up thinking she's a burden. I'd rather she know she's the reason I stayed alive." The morning came soft, the kind that drifted in like smoke from a chimney, quiet, steady, almost reluctant. A thin veil of fog clung to the hills behind the cabin, and dew shivered on the window ledge like it hadn't yet decided if it wanted to melt or freeze. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals, but the warmth still hung in the air, thick and close. Cullen sat at the kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, the other running slow strokes through Lily's tangled hair. She sat in his lap now more than ever, legs curled up silent, except for a soft hum she sometimes made when the wind moved through the trees. He'd started to learn her quiet language. Emery stood by the sink, peeling apples into a bowl. Her movements were slower than usual, shoulders drawn tight beneath her shawl. The tension had been building since Mr. Grady's visit the evening before. The older man had left behind a message neither of them could ignore. People ask questions, he'd said. You keep taking in strays, Cullen, and they're gonna come sniffing around wondering why. That had settled over the cabin like a shadow too large for the room. And now Emery moved with her jaw clenched and her eyes rimmed red, though she hadn't spoken a word about it since. Emery Cullen said quietly, rubbing Lily's back as the child dozed, "We need to talk about what Grady said." She paused mid-slice, then set the knife down with a soft click. "I figured we'd pretend it didn't happen. Seems safer that way. I can't protect her by pretending," he replied. "And I can't protect you that way either." She turned, arms folded across her chest, eyes fierce even in the early light. "You want to go to the sheriff? Turn her in. Let the system decide what kind of life she gets." His gaze didn't flinch. "Number one, I want to make it so the system can't take her at all." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want her here. With me. Legally." He looked down at Lily, small and fragile against his chest. "She needs someone who won't disappear, someone who stays," Emery's voice cracked. "You do that for her? I won't let her grow up thinking she's a burden. I'd rather she know she's the reason I stayed alive." A silence settled over the room that was heavier than any argument they could have had. The kind of silence where two people realize they're standing at the edge of something permanent. "I don't think she knows how much she's changed this place," Emery whispered. "I do," he replied. "But there's something else I need to tell you." She looked up, brows furrowing. He shifted Lily gently and stood careful not to wake her. "There's been men asking around. Not just folks like Grady. The kind that wear city coats and carry briefcases. They've been up in Laramie, and Cheyenne even came through Bear Creek, looking for a man who took in a wounded child." Emery's breath quickened. "You think they're here for her? I know they are. And if they're who I think they're, from whatever state home she ran from. That collar wasn't just cruel, it was a mark. A brand." Emery turned pale. "What do we do? I've got a plan," Cullen said. "But I'll need help." By noon, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of early snow. Emery rode out to warn Ruthie and Finch. The couple had a radio setup that could catch weather signals and outside news. They were cautious folks, knew how to keep secrets. Cullen stayed behind with Lily helping her draw shapes in the dirt with a stick. Her hands had grown steadier. She still couldn't walk, but she laughed more now. It came out in fits and wheezes like an old accordion, and every sound squeezed something inside his chest that had been locked up too long. She glanced up at him, brushing hair from her eyes. "Will you always be here?" He swallowed. "As long as you want me to be." She thought about that, then nodded solemnly, as if some sacred deal had been struck. Even if the bad men come, he reached down, took her hand. Even then, especially then, when Emery returned, her face was flushed from the ride. "Finch says a man matching your description was asking about Lily and Jackson. Claims to be an official from a children's home, but Finch said he wore the kind of boots no government man would ever wear. Bounty hunter, something worse. Private contractor, maybe." Cullen nodded slowly. "Then we don't have time." He opened a drawer near the hearth, pulled out a weathered envelope sealed and heavy. "This is the letter from Dr. Vernon. It's not official adoption paperwork, but it's a sworn statement saying I've been Lily's guardian for months. She treated her wounds. She'll back me if this goes legal. Emery stared at the envelope. You planned for this. I hoped I wouldn't need it. He set the envelope on the table and looked at Emery hard. I need you to take this to Laramie, to Judge Kavanaugh. Tell him what's going on. He owes me a favor. You're asking me to leave her. I wouldn't unless I believed you're the only one who can get this done. She nodded, though her mouth trembled. Then I'll leave before dawn. That night, the wind howled like something wounded. Cullen sat by the fire, Lily curled up in the quilt beside him. Her breathing was slow, but she clutched his thumb in her small hand, as if it anchored her to this world. He stared at the flames, thoughts churning. If Emery failed, if the contractor found them first, he'd run. Take Lily deeper into the hills. Hide her. But she deserved better than that. She deserved a name on paper, a place she could grow up without looking over her shoulder. The wind knocked something loose on the porch, and he went to fix it. But when he opened the door, it wasn't just the wind he heard. Footsteps. Too heavy for deer. Too light for bear. He stepped into the darkness, rifle in hand. The trees whispered. Snow was coming, and someone else was already too close. The only thing that ever made me feel seen was the way you looked at me like I mattered, like I wasn't broken beyond repair. The sound of boots crunching gravel outside the barn wasn't unfamiliar, but this time it struck like a warning bell. Lucy froze with her hand mid-brush over the horse's shoulder. Storm, her old chestnut gelding, flicked an ear, but didn't spook. She stepped quietly around his flank, her breath caught halfway in her chest. At the wide barn doors stood Corbin, hat in hand, eyes shadowed by more than brim or dusk. His knuckles were white around the worn edge of his Stetson. And behind him was that Sheriff Deeks, and Annie Mae Lucy wiped her hands on the front of her apron, more to buy time than to clean them. She stepped forward, slowly. Something happened. Corbin didn't answer right away. It was Annie Mae who stepped around him, wringing her hands in a way that made Lucy's stomach twist. It's Milo, Annie Mae said quietly. He's gone missing. Took off before daybreak. Left a note. Lucy blinked, and for a second the air vanished from the barn. Storm pawed the hay behind her, restless. Milo, she whispered. Why, where would he go? Corbin finally spoke, his voice low and gritty. Says he's going back east. Claims he's gonna find your brother Lucy. Says if that man won't come back to do right by you, then Milo's gonna make him. Lucy staggered back, one hand flying to her mouth. Her brother, Jed. She hadn't heard that name in months. Not since the letter stopped coming. Not since the promises of help dried up like an old creek bed. Milo can't. Her voice cracked. He can't just run off. He doesn't know the roads. He's not. He's still healing. Corbin, the sheriff, silent until now, finally tipped his head. The boy left on a trail pony. Says he's taken a map and your photograph. Lucy felt her knees go weak. She leaned against the stall gate for support. I never told him everything, she whispered. Not about Jed. Not about the real reason he left. Annie Mae touched her shoulder gently. He's not doing it to shame you. He's doing it 'cause he thinks he's protecting you. He loves you, Lucy. Like family. Lucy's mouth trembled. She'd known Milo was growing into himself more than just a wounded man with a borrowed name and a broken leg. But she hadn't seen this coming. The fierce, reckless kind of loyalty. The kind that made someone ride out alone into a world that had nearly killed him once before. I'll go after him, Corbin said firmly. He couldn't have gone far. I'll ride tonight, take Lem with me. Lucy's eyes welled, but she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. But when Corbin turned to go, she reached out and caught his sleeve. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He thinks he's replacing my brother. But he don't know what Jed really did. He don't know Jed sold the deed. Left me with a lien and a string of lies. Corbin's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time someone told him the truth. The barn fell quiet again after they left, and Lucy stood in the straw, her hands still shaking. Storm nudged her gently, and she pressed her cheek against his warm neck, drawing strength from the steadiness of something that wouldn't leave. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table with a single oil lamp burning. In front of her was an old cigar box, Jed's, with the initials burned into the lid. Inside were the letters he'd sent before he vanished eastward. Letters filled with promises he never kept. Ones Milo never saw. She ran her finger along the edge of the paper, heart heavy. Part of her wanted to burn them. Another part thought Milo deserved to read every word. There was a soft knock at the door, and for a moment she feared it was more bad news. But when she opened it, Cassie stood there, her red hair pulled back tight, her face pale. I saw the sheriff ride out, Cassie said. Is it true Milo's gone? Lucy stepped aside, nodding. He left a note. Said he's going to find Jed. Cassie's mouth fell open. But Jed's a crook, Lucy. He's the one who left you with nothing, I know. Lucy said quietly. But Milo doesn't. He sees a gap in my life and wants to fill it. Cassie stepped forward and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a tiny photo, a daguerreotype of Lucy and Jed taken when they were kids. Jed had his arm around her, then beaming with that wild, cocky smile. I found this at the post office, Cassie said. Got stuck between the cracks in a drawer. Might be the last picture Milo sees before he finds the man in it. Lucy took the photo, heart sinking. He won't know the difference. He'll think Jed's still that boy. Cassie shook her head. Then you better catch him before he learns the hard way. Lucy looked at the window. The wind had picked up clouds skimming low like ghosts across the moon. She knew what had to be done. I'm riding out at first light, she said. Cassie looked startled. Alone, I've ridden worse trails for less important reasons, Lucy said, her voice steady. I let too many people leave without fighting for them. Not this time. Cassie didn't argue. Instead, she stepped forward and gripped Lucy's hands. Bring him home, she said softly. At dawn, Lucy stood beside her mare saddlebag, packed rifle strapped, and the photo tucked deep into her blouse. She took one last look at the house, the place that had become her fortress, her prison, and her hope. Storm nickered behind her in the barn, but she stroked his nose and whispered goodbye. I'll be back, she said, with him. As she mounted the mare and clicked her tongue, the rising sun lit the horizon in streaks of blood orange and gold. The trail ahead was long, the risks heavy. But she rode with more than fear in her chest. She rode with fire. The educational lesson learned from this story is that love born from gratitude often grows into the fiercest kind of loyalty. When someone believes you're worth saving, they'll risk everything, even their own safety, to make sure you know you matter. Sometimes the ones we rescue become the ones who rescue us back. And in the space between truth and sacrifice, healing begins. I may not have a name worth remembering, but I sure as hell have a memory you won't forget. The courtroom door creaked as Lily Mae stepped inside her boots, muffled by the thick rugs that didn't belong to women like her. The judge hadn't looked up yet, and the lawyers on the opposing side barely hid their smirks. But it wasn't them she looked at. It was her father sitting behind the defense table, clean-shaven in a pressed suit, surrounded by strangers who bore his blood but not his bruises. Lily Mae's hands trembled only slightly as she adjusted the collar of her borrowed dress. It didn't matter anymore if it fit. Didn't matter if her shoes were scuffed. What mattered was the folder in her hand, worn at the edges, fat with letters, bills, and evidence. She'd pieced it together like a quilt, every square sewn with late nights, sleepless cries, and a child's forgotten promises. She wasn't here to fight for land or legacy. She was here to fight for her name. The bailiff called the hearing to order. The sound echoed like thunder in Lily May's chest. "All rise," the man said, and she did, squaring her shoulders even as her knees ached with the weight of everything she carried. The judge eyed the room, stern and unreadable. "Miss McCrae," he said, turning to her, "you're representing yourself." She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I don't got a lawyer, just truth." A few chuckles rippled behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her whole life had been lived with people laughing behind her back. But this was different. This time they'd hear her loud and clear. The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." She walked to the front, laid the folder down, and opened it. Here's the story nobody wanted to write," she began. "I ain't got fancy words. I ain't got nothing but what's real." Her voice was low at first, raspy with fatigue. But as she laid out each piece, the eviction notice forged in her name, the bank transfer that moved inheritance money without her signature, the letters from her mother full of veiled threats and promises of silence if she just disappeared, her voice began to strengthen. "After Mama passed, I ain't asked for much. I just wanted to keep my brother's old boots and the saddle Pa said would be mine. But what they did was more than stealing things. They tried to erase me." Her father still hadn't looked at her. Lily May's eyes narrowed. "He told the court I was unstable, unfit, that I was a burden on the family. But I ask you this, who drove my mama to the hospital the night her lungs gave out? Who fed her, washed her hair, held her hand when he wouldn't even come home? I ain't unstable. I just learned to walk with weight no one else wanted to carry." Her hand reached into the folder again, lifting a photo, her and Mama on the porch shelves in their laps, a scarf tied around her mother's thinning hair. "She didn't leave me nothing in writing," Lily May said quietly. "But she left me everything in love. I'd trade this whole courtroom just to hear her say my name one more time." The judge's gaze softened. A beat of silence passed through the room, thick as molasses. Then the lawyer for the other side stood up, smirking. "Miss McCrae, while your story is certainly touching, we must stick to legal facts. Sentiment doesn't decide inheritance law." Lily May turned slowly. "You want to talk facts?" She reached into her bag again and pulled out a worn notebook, her mama's. Pages full of her careful handwriting, each entry a confession. Of regret, of pain, of the lies she'd told to protect a husband who gambled too much and a daughter he never claimed. She handed it to the judge. Here's a record of every dollar taken from the family fund. Every lie she had to live with. Her guilt, her shame, her wish for me to be free." The judge flipped through the book. The lawyer's smile vanished. Lily May looked back at her father. His eyes had finally met hers, but they were glassy now, not sharp. Still, he didn't speak. Wouldn't. That part of him had died a long time ago. "I ain't trying to ruin anyone," she said, more to herself now than the court. "I just want back what was mine. Not the money, not even the land. Just the name, the truth. I want my mama's name cleared. I want mine to mean something again." The judge cleared his throat. "We will adjourn for a short recess while I review this evidence." As people shuffled out, Lily May stepped aside, heart hammering. Outside, the sky had gone gray again, the air heavy with dust and coming rain. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Ruthie, her cousin, the only one who hadn't testified against her. She held out a brown paper bag and a thermos. "Peach pie and hot coffee," she said. "Thought you might be needing something to hold on to." Lily May took it, hands shaking. "You stayed." "I never left," Ruthie whispered. "Just had to find my way back." Lily May bit back tears. "I thought I'd be standing here alone." "You were never alone," Ruthie said. "They just wanted you to believe that." The courthouse door swung open again. The judge's clerk called for them to return. Lily May squared her shoulders, coffee still warm in her hand. They walked back inside. As she stood waiting for the judge's decision, she didn't pray for a miracle. She didn't beg for sympathy. She just stood tall, quiet, and still like the mountains that had raised her. She had told her truth. Whatever came next would not erase that. The judge returned, face unreadable, but as he began to speak, Lily May reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around the old rusted key tied to a piece of leather. Her mama's last gift left on the kitchen windowsill the day before she died. A symbol of something nobody could ever take from her again. The wind pressed against the courthouse windows, and Lily May lifted her chin, ready to receive whatever came, because her name had already been carved in the stone of this land, even if no one wanted to see it. And in the corner of the courtroom, a tall man with quiet eyes, whom she hadn't noticed before, stepped forward through the crowd. His name was Eli Boone. He wasn't family, but his presence would change everything. Rain came in sheets that morning, the kind that blurred the edges of the mountains and turned the hard-packed dirt road into slick mud. Buck pulled his coat tight as he stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the horizon. He wasn't waiting for a storm. He was waiting for her. Inside, Rosa paced the floor. Her fingers itched to be useful, but her heart had never felt so useless. She'd risen early, thinking she'd help in the kitchen or tend to the animals, but her legs wouldn't carry her far. They barely got her from the bed to the parlor without buckling. The pain was back, not sharp like before, but dull, insistent, like it was growing roots inside her. Clara watched from the corner, mending a torn apron with needle and thread. "You're pushing too hard," she said gently, not looking up. "I'm falling behind," Rosa whispered. "You've already come further than anyone thought possible." Rosa didn't answer. Her eyes went to the window where Buck stood tall and still, like the cedar trees beyond. There was something in his silence that gave her strength, and something in it that frightened her. She could feel it building like the pressure before thunder. By noon, the rain had slowed to a mist. That's when the riders came. They weren't expected, weren't invited, but they came like they had every right to, 3 men on horseback, long dusters dark with water hats pulled low. One of them smiled with no warmth. It was Eli Cooper. Buck didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. Eli tipped his hat as he dismounted. "Heard you took in a girl limping along the trail," he said, his voice all honey and hooks. "Figured I'd come collect what's mine." Rosa froze in the doorway. Her breath caught. Clara stepped in front of her, shielding her with her body. "You got no right," she said. Eli chuckled. "Ain't about rights. It's about what's owed." Buck stepped off the porch, quiet as a shadow. "She don't owe you a thing," he said. "She's got my mark," Eli sneered. "She walked away before the job was done." "She was never your property," Buck said. "And if you think otherwise, you'd better leave now." "You really gonna draw on me for a broken girl?" Eli said. "You don't even know what she did, or what she is." "I know what she ain't," Buck said. "She ain't yours." The standoff stretched thin as wire. Rain tapped on hat brims and coat shoulders like a ticking clock. Then Rosa stepped forward. Her hands were trembling, but her voice didn't shake. He's right, she said. I'm not yours. I never was. I don't owe you pain just because you gave it to me. Eli laughed. You think you're brave now because he's standing next to you. Don't forget when you came to us, you couldn't even look a man in the eye. And now I can, she said. That's the difference. The man beside Eli shifted uneasily. The third one stared at Rosa, then looked away. Buck said nothing. He didn't need to. The cold weight of the Henry rifle resting in his grip did all the speaking. Eli spat into the mud. This ain't over, he muttered, swinging back into his saddle. Buck didn't flinch. Yes, it is. The three rode off, slow back straight, but shoulders tight. Only when they were specks on the road did Rosa allow her knees to buckle. Buck caught her before she hit the porch steps. He didn't lift her like a child this time. He let her lean against him, walk the steps one by one with her hand in his, and her head bowed. Inside, Clara brought a blanket and tea, but Rosa waved it off. I need to say something, she said. To you. To both of you. Clara paused, her hands full of wool. Buck remained silent beside the fire. I wasn't just someone's servant, Rosa said. I was part of something dark. I made bread for men who took things from others. I cleaned blood off floors. I stood by when girls screamed. The words fell like stones in water. I didn't help them, she said. But I didn't stop them either. Because I was scared. Because I thought if I was useful, they wouldn't turn on me. Buck looked up then. His eyes weren't hard. They were heavy. I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd survive, she whispered. You did survive, Clara said softly. But that ain't the same as living, Rosa replied. She turned to Buck. You had every reason to turn me away. You weren't looking for a judge, he said. You were looking for a home. She wiped her face with her sleeve, then laughed soft and hoarse. I'm still not sure I deserve one. You don't earn home, Buck said. You make one. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone lets you start over. Outside, the sun broke through the gray, and light poured into the room like forgiveness. That evening, they ate in silence, but it wasn't hollow like before. It was full of something warm and waiting. After supper, Clara handed Rosa a small wrapped bundle. What's this? Something I was saving. Thought it might be time. Inside was a pair of worn boots, soft leather, sturdy soles. I can't wear these, Rosa said. They're too good. You're not limping anymore, Clara said. Don't dress like you are. Rosa stared at them, her fingers brushing the seams. And then, in the hush of the firelight, Buck spoke. When a person starts to walk without fear, even the ground remembers how to rise up beneath them. That night, Rosa didn't cry. She laid the boots beside her bed and slept with one hand resting on them like a promise. In the morning, she'd lace them up. She'd walk again, not to run, not to flee, but to begin. And the trail ahead wouldn't be quiet. It would be filled with the sound of her own steps, steady whole hers. The morning sun stretched long golden lines across the kitchen table, lighting up the flour Clara sifted into a wide ceramic bowl. Rosa sat beside her, a damp cloth pressed to the back of her neck, sweat clinging to her collar despite the early hour. The air was thick and still summer bearing down hard. Every breath she took felt like it had to claw through heat. Buck passed the open doorway, shirt stuck to his back shoulders, shining with effort. He was hauling fence boards again, rebuilding the north line. He worked like a man, carrying more than just wood, like each swing of the hammer was keeping something deeper from falling apart. Clara watched Rosa from the corner of her eye. You don't look right. I'll be fine, Rosa muttered, rubbing her temple. Clara paused, then set the bowl aside. You've been saying that for 3 days. Ain't no badge of honor sufferin' in silence. It's just the heat, Rosa insisted. I've worked through worse. Clara didn't argue, just walked to the sink, poured a ladle of cool water and brought it back. Drink this, then lie down. Ain't nobody judging you for resting. But Rosa didn't move. She looked toward the window, out past the cottonwoods, to where Buck drove nails into stubborn posts. Her fingers curled in her lap. I don't want him to think I'm weak again, she said. Clara leaned close, voice low and sure. That man's seen strength he didn't expect in you. Don't insult him by thinking he'd forget it. Rosa closed her eyes and took the water, but her heart thumped uneasy. By midday, her fever spiked. She tried to hide it, slipping out to sweep the porch. But the world tilted. One moment, her hand gripped the broom. The next, her knees buckled like straw. The porch blurred sideways. Buck caught her just before her head hit the step. She woke in the dim bedroom curtains, drawn her skin clammy and chilled. Clara's voice floated in and out from nearby, but Rosa couldn't make out the words. She heard Buck, though. We need the doctor, he said. Ride into town, Clara answered. I'll keep her cool best I can. Then boots pounded away, the front door slammed, and everything went quiet. Hours passed, maybe more. Rosa drifted in and out, caught between dreams and shadows. She remembered fire, remembered shouting, remembered the heavy slap of a man's hand years ago when she'd tried to stand up for another girl. The pain laced into her again, old and new, burning down her spine. Sometime near dusk, Buck returned. She heard his boots before anything, steady, hard, fast. Then his voice. Where is she in here? Clara called, pushing the door wide. The doctor followed behind him, a quiet man with weathered hands and sharp eyes. He said little, worked quick, checked her pulse, her lungs, her back. She's fighting infection, he said. Looks like it started where that old injury healed wrong. Buck's face went cold. Can you fix it? He asked. Best I can do is try. She's strong, but the body has its limits. Rosa opened her eyes at that. Her voice was sandpaper. Don't talk like I'm not here. The doctor blinked, then smiled faintly. Good. That spirit'll help. He gave Clara instructions, cool cloths, crushed willow bark broth. Then he stood and motioned Buck to follow. Outside the door, the doctor spoke lower. She needs time, needs quiet. If she pulls through, she'll still have to face some hard truths. This wasn't just heat or overwork. This was waiting to break. Buck leaned on the wall, staring into nothing. She came here broken, he said. No, the doctor said. She came here cracked. There's a difference. When the house settled into night, Rosa stirred again. Clara had dozed off in a chair beside her, and Buck stood by the window watching the stars start to pin themselves across the sky. You didn't have to stay, Rosa rasped. He turned. I did. She tried to sit, winced. I hate this, feeling helpless, like I'm back where I started. You're not, he said. You're here. That makes all the difference. She swallowed hard. I should have told you sooner, about the old wound, the way it never fully healed. You didn't owe me that, Buck said. But you owe yourself care. Her eyes filled the shame crawling up again. What if this takes everything I've gained? What if I can't work, can't walk? He crossed to her, knelt beside the bed, and took her hand gently in his calloused one. You being whole ain't about walking without pain. It's about walking anyway. Sometimes healing ain't about fixing the damage. It's about letting the light touch the places you've kept hidden. Her lip trembled. She pressed her forehead to his hand. Outside, the night hummed with crickets and warm air. Inside, Rosa breathed steady for the first time in hours. The worst might not be behind her, but she wasn't alone in it. She wasn't hiding anymore. The sunlight slanted through the barn slats, falling in ribbons across Rosa's boots as she took careful, deliberate steps. The ground beneath her feet was solid, warm, familiar. She walked slowly, her left leg stiff, but holding her balance more sure than it had been in weeks. The pain was still there, deep in the bone, like a memory, but it no longer defined her. It no longer ruled the way she carried herself. Buck stood just inside the barn, pretending to be sorting harnesses, though his eyes flicked up every few seconds to watch her progress. Clara leaned against the stall door, arms folded, a small smile tucked into the corners of her mouth. "You're still favoring that hip," Clara said gently. "I know," Rosa said, breath even. "But I'm walking. More than that. You're walking like you believe you belong here." Rosa turned, brushing hair from her face. "I'm trying to." The days since her fever had been slow and full of silence. Not the bad kind, not the sort that came when people avoided what needed saying, but the kind that settled deep and let everything inside of her rethread itself. Clara had sat with her every morning, teaching her the way sourdough rose with patience, the way to press and fold and not force. Healing had been like that slow, steady quiet. She was still learning to trust it. Later that afternoon, Rosa moved to the front porch and sat with a lap full of peaches needing to be skinned. The juice clung to her fingers, sweet and sticky. The breeze stirred her dress, and the smell of summer filled her lungs. She hadn't realized how much she missed the feeling of simply being part of something, part of a place, part of a day that didn't ask her to outrun herself. Buck came up the steps and eased onto the swing beside her. He was silent at first, just listening to the creak of the chains, the hum of insects, the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods. Then finally he said, "You look different." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she held up one of the peaches, bright and firm, and said, "You ever notice how fruit bruises easiest at the height of ripeness?" He looked at her, puzzled. "It's when it's finally sweet," she said. "Soft enough to share, but most vulnerable too." He nodded slowly. "I reckon people are the same." "I was bitter for so long," she admitted. "Even before the injury. Even before the collar. I didn't know how to be anything but angry. You had reason, but the reason became an excuse." She paused. "I didn't want to need anyone. Not after everything. But when I was sick. When I couldn't stand when you all took care of me." He shifted closer. "We weren't keeping score, Rosa." She smiled faintly. "I know. That's what scared me the most." He reached over and took a slice of peach from her bowl, chewing it slowly. "Scared you because it was kindness. Scared me because it was real." They sat there for a while longer, not needing to fill the silence. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with gold and fire. Then Clara appeared at the door with a small envelope in her hand. "This came today," she said, holding it out. Rosa took it, her fingers trembling. There was no return address, but the handwriting was neat and familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. Inside was a letter, short, signed only with initials, but it was enough. Her father's words were careful, distant, and filled with too much pride to admit guilt. But there was something else. An offer. "If you ever find yourself needing help," it read, "you have my number. I don't expect forgiveness, just wanted you to know." She folded the letter slowly. "What does it say?" Clara asked. Rosa shook her head. "He's still the same, but he's trying to pretend he isn't." Buck watched her closely. "You gonna write back, I don't know?" Her voice was quiet. "I don't need him to say sorry. I just needed to stop letting his silence shape mine." Buck stood reaching for the bowl of peach skins. "You want me to toss these? I'll come with you." She rose without thinking, her body remembering how to move forward, how to carry itself without apology. They walked together toward the back of the house, toward the compost heap near the fence line. The sky above them stretched wide and full of breath. There was a peace in Rosa now that hadn't been there before. Not a peace that came from forgetting, but from holding everything hurt and healing in the same hands. As they reached the fence, a wagon rattled down the road in the distance. Dust rose in a trail behind it, and the sound of children laughing echoed faintly on the wind. Rosa leaned on the fence rail and looked out over the land. "You think it's possible," she asked, "to start again without starting over?" Buck placed the bowl down, met her eyes. "Sometimes we don't need to be made new," he said. "Just finally seen for who we were underneath all along." She nodded, breath catching in her throat. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what? To let people see me. All of me." Buck smiled and tipped his hat back. "Then let's make sure they know where to look." They turned back toward the house together, the peach trees swaying in the distance, heavy with promise. The educational lesson learned from this story is that true healing often begins when we allow others to care for us, not just when we learn to stand on our own. Sometimes the strength we need isn't found in independence, but in vulnerability shared with trustworthy hearts. Life has a way of softening us just when we think we must stay hard, and it's in that softening, through love, community, and time, that we rediscover who we've always been underneath the pain. Letting ourselves be seen, even with our scars, can lead to the deepest kind of freedom.